There's a difference between radical indifference and emotional shutdown. Most people never find it. And that gap, that narrow, almost invisible passage between the two, is where your actual freedom lives. Let me show you what I mean. You know the person who doesn't care what anyone thinks. You've met them. Maybe you've admired them from a distance. The one who says exactly what they mean, moves through rooms without performing, makes decisions based on their own compass rather than the approval of whoever happens to be watching. You look at that person and something in you pulls toward them. Something in you says, I want that. But then you've also met the other version. The person who's armored themselves so completely against the opinions of others that they've accidentally armored themselves against connection itself. Against warmth. Against the ability to receive love or criticism or feedback. The person who calls it freedom, but whose eyes are flat. Who mistakes numbness for strength. Who has confused not being hurt with not being alive. And something in you, wisely, does not want that. Here's the problem. Most people trying to develop thicker skin, more confidence, more independence from other people's judgments, end up sliding toward the second type without ever reaching the first. They don't find freedom from other people's opinions. They find a fortress, impressive from the outside, uninhabitable within. The Stoic philosophers, specifically Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and Seneca, spent enormous intellectual energy on exactly this problem. How to build a self that is genuinely, functionally free from the need for external validation. Not numb, not cold, not disconnected, but free. The difference is everything, and today I'm going to hand you the actual map. Let's start with an honest inventory. How many decisions have you made in the last 30 days that were at least partially shaped by what someone else might think? The outfit you chose, the opinion you kept to yourself, the project you didn't start because you couldn't be certain how it would land, the boundary you didn't set because you were afraid of how the other person would react, the thing you said yes to when everything in you wanted to say no. Now here's the harder question. How many of those decisions do you even consciously remember? Because the insidious thing about living inside the approval trap is that most of it operates below the surface. It's not dramatic. You don't pause and think, I'm going to suppress my real preference here in order to maintain this person's approval. It happens faster than thought. A micro-calculation so habitual, so automatic, so deeply grooved into the operating system that it doesn't feel like a choice at all. It feels like you. That's the trap. Not that it controls you from outside, that it migrates inside, disguises itself as your personality, and runs your decisions from there. The psychologists call this the Sociometer, an internal meter, running constantly, monitoring your standing in the social group. Your brain is always, at some level, tracking. Am I approved of? Am I included? Am I seen as competent, likable, valuable, good? This is not a character flaw. It is an evolutionary inheritance. For most of human history, social rejection was not uncomfortable. It was lethal. A person cast out of the tribe in the Pleistocene did not have options. They died. Your brain doesn't know the Pleistocene is over. It still registers social disapproval as a survival threat. The anxiety you feel when you imagine saying the unpopular thing, taking the unconventional path, being genuinely seen and possibly rejected. That anxiety is your ancient threat detection system doing its job, just the wrong job, in the wrong century. And here's where the modern world has made it catastrophically worse. You now carry, in your pocket, a device that provides you with a continuous real-time readout of how much other people approve of what you said, what you shared, how you looked, what you think. Likes, views, comments, follows, saves, shares. The Sociometer that was always running in the background has been given a dashboard. And the dashboard never sleeps. The result is a generation, multiple generations actually, conducting their interior lives in a state of permanent audience awareness. Never fully alone, never fully unobserved. Always at some level performing. Always at some level waiting for the verdict. This is not freedom. This is a very sophisticated, very socially acceptable, very invisible cage. And the Stoics, 2,000 years before the algorithm existed, diagnosed it with extraordinary precision and built the key to get out. Before Epictetus gives you the prescription, he insists on the correct diagnosis. Because the wrong diagnosis produces the wrong cure. And most people are working with the wrong diagnosis. The wrong diagnosis is, I care too much what people think. This sounds right, but it's imprecise. And the imprecision leads directly to the wrong solution, which is care less, feel less. Stop giving people so much power over you. You've tried that. It doesn't work, because you cannot decide, by act of will, to stop caring. The Sociometer doesn't have an off switch. The more you try to force yourself not to care, the more cognitive energy you dedicate to the caring, which makes it louder, not quieter. The correct Stoic diagnosis is more precise. You have confused two entirely different things and collapsed them into one. You have confused someone's opinion of you with the truth about you. You have granted other people's judgments a metaphysical authority they do not possess. Epictetus makes this distinction with a clarity that is almost violent. If anyone tells you that a certain person speaks ill of you, do not make excuses about what is said of you, but answer, "He was ignorant of my other faults, else he would not have mentioned these alone." Read that twice. He's not saying, "Don't worry about it, they're probably wrong." He's not offering comfort. He's doing something far more radical. He's pointing out that the other person's opinion is a product of their limited information, their particular psychology, their own unresolved interior life. It is a data point about them. It is not a verdict about you. This is the core Stoic reframe. And it is not a trick. It is a philosophical truth that holds up under serious examination. When someone judges you, what are they actually doing? They are running your appearance, your actions, your words through the filter of their own history, their own fears, their own values, their own wounds. They are producing an output that tells you something about the nature of that filter. It may incidentally tell you something useful about you. It may contain a piece of genuine feedback worth extracting. But it is not the truth of you. It is a shadow thrown by you onto the wall of their interior world. And you have been mistaking the shadow for the substance. The Stoic work is not to stop seeing the shadow. It is to stop treating it as a mirror. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor, the man whose every decision was observed and commented upon by 60 million people, wrote in his private journal, "I have often wondered how it is that every man loves himself more than all the rest of men, but yet sets less value on his own opinion of himself than on the opinion of others." A man who ran the world, writing to himself in the dark, still fighting the same battle. That should tell you something about the depth of the problem and about the ongoing, never-finished nature of the work required to address it. Now we get into the actual technology. This is the part I want you to take notes on. Not because you'll remember it all, but because encountering it in writing, even briefly, begins a process. The Stoics offered 3 specific, interlocking tools for building freedom from others' opinions. Not coldness, not indifference. Freedom. Tool 1, the inner citadel. Marcus Aurelius used a specific architectural metaphor for the self that is free from external judgment. He called it to hegemonikon, the ruling faculty, the inner citadel. The image is deliberate and important. A citadel is not a wall. It is not a fortress of suppression that keeps everything out. It is a center, a place of genuine authority from which you operate, to which you can always return, which cannot be taken from you regardless of what happens at the perimeter. Here's what this looks like in practice. Most people who are enslaved to others' opinions have never actually really answered with full adult honesty, the foundational questions of their own character. What do I actually value? What kind of person am I trying to become? What would I do if approval were impossible, if no one would ever know and no one could ever praise me? These questions feel simple. They are not simple. Most people avoid them precisely because the honest answers require a level of self-confrontation that is deeply uncomfortable. But here's what Epictetus understood. The person who cannot answer those questions is constitutionally incapable of freedom from external judgment, because external judgment only has power in a vacuum. It rushes in to fill the space left by the absence of internal judgment. If you do not have a clear, honest, examined sense of who you are and what you stand for, other people's opinions of who you are and what you stand for will fill that space automatically. You will live inside their story of you because you haven't written your own. The first Stoic tool is therefore not a technique. It is a project. The project of answering the foundational questions, not perfectly, not once, but continuously, with increasing honesty. Until the inner citadel is real enough, solid enough, specific enough, that it can stand against the weather of other people's judgments. When someone criticizes you and you have a clear inner citadel, something very different happens than when you don't. Without the citadel, the criticism lands and you scramble. You defend or you collapse or you agree immediately to make the discomfort stop. You are blown wherever the wind pushes you. With the citadel, the criticism lands and you can actually examine it because you're not afraid of it. You're not threatened by it. You have somewhere to stand while you look at it. You can ask, is there something useful here? Does this align with anything I know to be true about myself? Does this person have information I lack? And if the answer is no, if the criticism is a projection, a misreading, or simply another person's agenda dressed up as feedback, you can set it down, not with hostility, not with defensiveness, with the quiet authority of someone who lives inside themselves. Tool 2. The premeditation of judgment. This is the Stoic technique that will feel most immediately practical. And that is also the most misunderstood. The Stoics practiced premeditatio, premeditation of many things: death, loss, adversity. But Epictetus specifically recommended the premeditation of social exposure, of judgment, of the precise experience you are most trying to avoid. Here's how it works. Before the situation where judgment is likely, before the difficult conversation, the public presentation, the creative work you release into the world, the opinion you state in a room that might push back, you deliberately imagine the worst version of the social response. Not to catastrophize, not to rehearse failure, but to evacuate the power of the fear before it can ambush you. The thing that makes social judgment so destabilizing is its surprise. When you're blindsided by criticism, by disapproval, by the reaction you didn't expect. The combination of the judgment itself and the shock of it arriving overwhelms the system. You react before you've thought. You say something defensive, or you collapse, or you perform an apology you don't mean. But when you've already imagined it, when you've sat with the worst possible response and asked yourself, and then what? What would I do? How would I actually handle it? Would I survive it? The answer, almost invariably, is yes. You would survive it. You have survived worse. You will survive worse. The fear of judgment is almost always larger than the judgment itself. And the premeditation shrinks the fear to its actual size. Here's a specific practice. Before any situation where you're aware of the desire for approval, take 90 seconds and complete this sequence. 1. Imagine the harshest possible response. The silence, the criticism, the disapproval. Let yourself feel the discomfort of it. 2. Ask yourself, is this a survival threat? The answer is no. It is never a survival threat. The Pleistocene is over. 3. Ask yourself, what do I know to be true about this work, this decision, this expression, independent of how it lands? 4. Act from the answer to question 3. That sequence, 90 seconds run honestly, is the difference between a decision made from your citadel and a decision made from your fear. Run it enough times and it becomes automatic. The pause before the reaction becomes natural, and the natural you, the you that acts from your own center rather than from the anticipated opinions of others, begins to be the ordinary you, not the exceptional you, the daily you. Tool 3, the radical distinction between shame and guilt. This is the one that almost no one includes in the Stoic conversation, and it is possibly the most important. Because here's the thing, not every uncomfortable response to other people's judgments is something to be overcome. Some of it is information. The Stoics, despite their reputation for emotional detachment, were sophisticated enough to understand that not all social feeling is fear-based approval-seeking. Some of it is your own value system doing its job. The distinction they drew, and that modern psychology has confirmed in remarkable detail, is between shame and guilt. Shame says, I am bad. It is global, about identity, about worth. It is corrosive. It shuts down reflection rather than enabling it. It produces not correction, but hiding. Guilt says, I did something that conflicts with my values. It is specific, about action, about behavior. It is, when used correctly, one of the most useful signals the moral system has. The Stoic practice is not to eliminate social sensitivity. It is to become precise about which type is operating. When you feel the sting of someone's judgment, the question is not, should I care about this? The question is, what is this feeling telling me, specifically? If it's shame, if the feeling is, this person's disapproval means I am fundamentally inadequate, unworthy, wrong as a person, that is the Stoic work. That is the fear that must be examined and dissolved. That is where the inner citadel work happens. But if it's guilt, if the feeling is, I acted in a way that conflicted with my own values, and this person's response is drawing my attention to that, that is not weakness. That is your moral system functioning correctly. A person who has eliminated all response to others' judgments has not become free. They have become unreachable. They have disabled the feedback mechanism that makes growth possible. The Stoic ideal is not imperviousness. It is discernment, the capacity to receive a judgment, to examine it cleanly without being overwhelmed by it, to extract whatever is genuinely useful from it, and to release the rest without residue. That is a very different thing from not caring. It is, in fact, a more sophisticated form of caring. Caring about what is true, what is useful, what actually serves your becoming. Rather than caring about what is comfortable, what is flattering, what protects you from the discomfort of being seen. Here is the thing about the Stoic freedom from judgment that most people miss, because it sounds like a paradox until you've actually experienced it. The people who are most genuinely free from others' opinions are almost always the most genuinely warm, not the coldest, the warmest. Because here's what happens when you stop needing people's approval. You stop needing to manage them. Think about how much of your social behavior, your agreeableness, your accommodation, your careful navigation of other people's reactions, is not actually warmth. It is management. It is the anxious work of keeping people satisfied so that they remain a source of approval rather than a source of threat. That is not love. That is transaction. When you no longer need anything from people, when their approval is genuinely, functionally not what you're there for, you can actually be with them, fully, without agenda. You can tell them the honest thing because you're not afraid of the reaction. You can sit in the discomfort of a hard conversation because you're not managing anyone's approval of you within it. You can receive their pain without immediately trying to fix it because you're not desperate to be seen as helpful. You can disagree without it feeling like a rupture because the relationship isn't built on the agreement. This is intimacy. Real, adult, unsentimental intimacy made possible precisely by the absence of approval need. Marcus Aurelius writes about this with characteristic directness. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. Now, that sounds simple. It is not simple. Because right and true are answers you can only access from your citadel, from your own examined center, not from the anticipated reactions of whoever is in the room. The man or woman who lives there, who has done enough of the inner work to know what they actually think, what they actually value, what they actually believe. That person does not perform warmth. They have it freely, with no strings attached, because they are not extracting anything from the connection. And paradoxically, it is that quality, that freely given, unneedy, genuinely present warmth, that other people are most drawn to, most comforted by, most changed by. The person you most want to be around is almost never the most eager to please. It is the most honest, the most real, the most, in the Stoic sense, free. Let me bring this out of the philosophical and into the operational, into Tuesday morning. The Teflon mind, the one I'm describing, the one the Stoics were building, is not a disposition you arrive at through understanding. It is a capacity you develop through practice. Here is a 5-part daily practice, drawn directly from Stoic methodology, that builds that capacity incrementally, not in a week, over months, but with results that begin to show within days if you do it honestly. Practice 1, the morning audit, 5 minutes. Before your day makes contact with the external world, sit with one question. What am I doing today, and why am I doing it? Specifically, is there anything on today's agenda that you are doing primarily because of how it will look? A decision shaped by someone else's anticipated reaction rather than your own examined judgment? Name it. Write it down if you can. You're not required to change it immediately. Just see it. The act of seeing it clearly without flinching is the beginning of the work. Practice 2. The pause before the performance, in real time. This is the one you do in the moment. When you feel the familiar pull, the urge to agree when you disagree, to soften when honesty is needed, to shrink when presence is required. Pause. One breath. That's it. In that breath. Am I about to respond from my citadel or from my fear? You don't have to always choose the citadel. Not yet. The practice is not perfection. The practice is noticing. Because what you notice, you begin to change. Without exception. Practice 3. The judgment audit, evening, 10 minutes. At the end of the day, review the moments where you were aware of others' opinions, where you shaped your behavior in response to them. For each one, run the shame or guilt distinction. Was what I felt shame a global assault on my worth? Or guilt? A specific signal from my own value system? If shame, note what belief about your adequacy was activated and mark it as a Stoic work item. This is the Citadel building. If guilt, note what the action was and what value it conflicted with. This is information. Use it. Practice 4. The voluntary exposure. Once a week, deliberately do one thing that risks disapproval. Not recklessly, not provocatively, not for the performance of courage. Simply say the honest thing in a conversation where the safer thing is available. Share the creative work before you're certain it's ready. State the unpopular opinion in a room where the popular one would cost you nothing. Feel the discomfort of the exposure. And notice, you survived. File the evidence. Update the prediction. Your brain will eventually, not through argument, but through accumulation of evidence, begin to revise its assessment of what disapproval actually costs. Practice 5. The Citadel questions. Weekly, 15 minutes. Once a week, sit with the foundational questions that build the inner citadel. Not the same questions each week. Rotate through them. Let them deepen over time. What did I value this week, independent of whether anyone noticed? Where did I act from my center, and where did I act from my fear? What do I believe about this specific question? Not what do I know people expect me to believe. Who am I becoming, and is that the person I would choose to become if no one was watching? These are not comfortable questions. They are not supposed to be. They are the specific discomforts from which the citadel is built. Solid ground is not soft, but you can stand on it. Conclusion: the freedom that feels like warmth. Let me close with this. Epictetus was a slave, legally owned, physically tortured, stripped of every external freedom a human being can possess. And he was, by all accounts of those who knew him, one of the freest people who ever lived. Not because he felt nothing, not because he'd armored himself against the world, because he had located, through decades of the hardest possible practice, the part of himself that no one could reach without his permission. Not the body. The body had been broken, not the reputation. The reputation of a slave was whatever the owner chose it to be. Not the comfort, he had none of it. The ruling faculty, the inner citadel, the center that was genuinely, functionally, inalienably his. From that center, he could be kind without being needy, honest without being cruel, present without being dependent, connected without being owned. That is not coldness. That is the specific flavor of freedom that, once you've tasted it, makes every other kind of freedom taste thin. And it is available to you. Not because you're enslaved, though you may feel enslaved in ways you haven't fully named yet, but because the citadel can be built from any circumstance, on any conditions, starting with whatever you have right now. The person who doesn't need your approval can give you something no approval seeker ever could. The truth, their actual presence, the specific, irreplaceable experience of being with someone who is entirely themselves. That is what you're building. Not a wall, a self. And the world, the people in your life who matter most, will feel the difference immediately. Not because you've become harder to reach, because you've finally become real enough to find. I want you to leave one thing in the comments before you close this video. Finish this sentence. Honestly, just one line. The opinion I've been letting run my decisions that I'm done giving power to is underscore, underscore, underscore. Name it. Put it in writing. Because named things lose power faster than unnamed things. And the community watching this channel is full of people doing the same work, in the same honest, unsentimental way. If this hit something real for you, subscribe. This channel exists for the person who is ready to stop performing their life and start living it. And we go deep here, every time, without apology. If you want the full Stoic framework for building the inner citadel, the complete practice that takes everything in this video and turns it into a daily operating system, that video is right here. You don't need anyone's permission to become yourself. You never did.